All right, that should be set. How you guys doing, man? Just thought I'd get on here and make video number 2. So I was thinking, I gotta get RPG Maker opened up. I'm using, I think Cherry made it. It's the Ultimate 2009 Ultimate. That's what I run it in. RPG Maker, the Sakuru, if that's how you pronounce it. Not really sure. But that's what I'm running. I really like it. I'm used to it now. So when I use the default RPG Maker 2003 or even the official version, it just feels a little different. And I bought the official, but I haven't used it really more than just kind of seeing what features it had. So I was thinking, obviously this is a action RPG. 2K3 wasn't designed to do action combat. So I would say design it from the ground up, but I actually followed when I first started to get the action aspect of it, where you swing your sword on the map and see your guys, you see the animation and it actually damages enemies. I followed a tutorial on RMN, downloaded it, had an example program, an example project. And I basically, I didn't know what a switch was. I didn't know what a variable was. I just, I remember at one point, I was so confused by variables and switches because I understood, I played a lot on Excel for work, and I was actually kind of the Excel guy at my last job. So I understood computer logic, but because I played with 2003, it was when I was a kid, probably had just a lot of preconceived notions from back then. I was really confused and overwhelmed with stuff like that. I didn't really get what they were for at one point. So when I followed that project, it had stuff in the common event database. I followed it literally step for step. I named the variables and the switches the same that he had in his. At one point, I actually thought that there was like a code. Whatever you named the variable or switch, it was like a command, and it would do that command. And now I don't remember what it was. I went on a little bit I decided to make my own menu system, and finally, at some point, not too deep into it, it clicked. Like, oh yeah, okay, I get it now. But anyways, I altered that. I followed that tutorial, and for mine, eventually, as I understood it more and more, I ended up altering it. For example, so here's my sword pose. So that's like the first swing he does with this sword out of the cycle of 4. And this is just the event for that, the common event for that. Now, what happens basically, instead of a typical hitbox where your animation plays and you have like a radius around your guy, that it does the math, and if something's within that radius or that little block, that little square, whatever the hitbox is, however it's calculated, is going to be damaged. What mine actually does is your animation plays. So these are all, only lets you do it if certain switches aren't active. It turns turns certain switches off, certain switches on, and then it plays through, if your hero's facing up, it'll play through the animation. And it's not until after, obviously it's only like 0.2 of a second, the animation total, or 0.3 of a second. It looks like I got 3.1 weights in there. The animation plays. And what actually happens is I get my hero X and Y coordinates. So you see here, screen, here it is. Attack X and attack Y, your hero's X and Y coordinates. And the hitbox is actually, so this first thing it's checking is the tile that the hero's standing on. And that tile calls an event that's referenced through variables, the call event reference through variables. And the variable is tracking, I think, is a independent event on each map. Obviously, just copy and paste the map. So that's never like a process. It's kind of set, kind of worked out. You work it out on one map, and then I just copy and paste that map, and then I'll change the chipset. And then if I'm going to design new enemies, that's what I would do, is take one of my enemies that's existing. So that way their coordinates is all set up for the screen tracking where they're at. And then I'll change whatever character set is assigned to that event, that enemy event, and then go through and start programming or eventing the that enemy's particular routine. So when it calls that event, this common event, when it calls the hitbox, so it checks that first tile and it calls whatever events on that tile. Page 1 of that event. Page 1 on enemies is that's what it's calling, and that's what handles what happens when that enemy gets hit by your sword or any kind of weapon. And then right after that, attack X. So hero's attack X coordinate minus Y, because your hero's swinging from left to right. So it's one tile left of the hero, and then it checks to see if there's an event there, and it calls that page 1 event. So it does that on so many tiles around the hero, and that's actually how the hitbox works as far as attacking enemies and hitting them. So it's tile by tile. It's not like a pixel perfect hitbox. And I just kind of wanted to give you a rundown of that. That's kind of the segue into, I just thought I'd run through and show you how some enemies work in Onix Rift. Let's start with, so here's just the typical enemy. We have a Cobalt. They're pretty easy. So page 1, it's every page 1 of any enemy is identical. It's except for target strength, target defense. I'll set those to whatever I want, whatever that enemy's going to be, their strength and their defense. Other than that, everything's, the formula doesn't change. Everything's based off of those two things. So those are the only two things that really change. If they're an enemy that might have another stat like magic or something, that would be a third variable in there. But mostly, in fact, when I'm eventing enemies, there's not 4 or 5 different stats to the enemy, and most of the time it's strength. And if they have like a skill or a magic attack, I'll just within the enemy executing that skill, and if it hits your hero, because there'll be another target strength, target defense, it calls that. If it's the opposite, if I'm not damaging him but he's damaging me, I'll go through the event and make sure that the strength and the defense are the same on every page, which has been an issue before. I've realized that I forgot to change certain variables, because sometimes when this is the first enemy I made, he's pretty bare bones, 4 pages. They get a lot more involved after I got farther into the game. But that would be target defense. It would still, or at least need the strength to run the calculation to see how much damage the hero took, or if he even hit me. Maybe the hero defended it, or maybe he was missed by the attack. But when I was designing Onix Rift, my goal from the beginning was to be pretty not too many statistics. It was my first game. I didn't want a bunch of huge Final Fantasy VIII combat calculations. I wanted to keep it simple for me. And I just wanted the type of game that it is, I wanted it to be a simple game. You can tell when you pause the game, you can see you just have a hit point, strength, defense, and magic, I think, are your stats, and that's it. So I basically make the enemies work off of just having these two variables, strength and defense, and if an enemy has a magic or a skill, I'll just multiply its strength by, 3, divide it by 2, so that I think it'll do 1.5. I don't think it would show it on a variable, but I think the engine, I think it would show it rounded up or down, but the engine, I'm assuming, will calculate it as 1.5. I could be wrong. I don't know. It seems to work out. So that's what the page 1 would be. So you'll never see that unless the hero hits him. But this event page, it processes so fast, it doesn't change to the Cobalt, little balled up Cobalt there. It won't change to that graphic. You won't see it. The human eye won't see it. The miss, it's not set to wait. The miss animation, that's actually a battle animation. That'll still play through because I don't have it as halt other processes or anything. So that'll play through, but it won't like pause to this thing. This is the calculating page. After this, see this one right here shows you switch operation 168, enemy target switch 7 on. So what that does, that's page 3, enemy target switch 7 on, and that's the animation you'll see. And this is where it takes the numbers it got there and Oh no, it does. So page 1 is where all the calculation happens, and then page 3, the target, the 168 enemy target switch 7, that is just where the graphic will be shown, whether he takes damage, which is this else handler and down, or whether he dies and it plays right here. And I actually count their hit points up, so they all enemy HP variables get zeroed out every single map. And then when you go to the next map, they're all at 0. And so this guy with 8 hit points, you know, the way it figures it is it actually adds to the variable rather than setting it to 8 and subtracting it, because it just seems easier to zero them out and then set each enemy individually to, like, it'll be this number right here, enemy HP 7. If I wanted it to have 160 hit points, I would just change that conditional branch to 160 instead of 8. And it would play through his damage. So all the enemies have basically this page and that page. And then this is what you actually see walking around on the screen. Page 2. Parallel process. And actually, this right here should have a weight 0. So you guys have all seen RPG Maker 2003. If you play a parallel process that has like show pictures, or it's doing a lot rather than just maybe, you know, doing some behind the scenes numbers, you're not going to get more than 2 or 3 parallel processes before you start seeing serious lag, like unplayable lag. I'm sure most of you know already, you guys are pretty sharp, but the way to do it, I call it a speed limit. You have to put a speed limit on all your parallel processes. So I might have 100 parallel processes going at once. I certainly have a lot going, and I don't really get any lag. And that's from just I start every event, label 1, and a weight 0.00 or 0.0. And that's kind of setting your speed limit. Then it can cycle through. I actually have, it works so well, as long as they have that speed limit. I personally, as long as I'm doing it that way, that weight 0, as long as I'm doing it that way, I haven't really, that I can remember, had any processes that I need for the game to function cause any lag from that. If you're playing the game and you go to a map, I think there was someone that had downloaded it and played it, and they hit me up on a private message. The name Gary's coming to mind. I'm not sure. Hey, if it's you, Gary, that PM'd me, right on, dude. Because I just checked it the other day, and it was the town map. And he said, you know, maybe it's my computer. I'm using an old computer, but I get pretty bad lag in the town, the first town I go to. And I checked it out, and guess what? I had 4 parallel process events. It doesn't lag on my computer, but when he told me that, when I checked it out, I have 4 parallel process events that have to do with showing the hero's hit points. So they were, but they were looking for button commands. So they're pretty, created some overhead if they didn't have a speed limit on them. And not one of them had the weight 0.0, and I added those in. I never got lag on it on mine, but now I would assume that that's what was causing him to see lag on that town map. So I always do label 1. It's just a habit. Even if it's a call event, I just make myself have that habit of starting with label 1 and then the weight 0.0. And then as you go down the page, if I have a lot of them, this is one of my earlier ones that don't see as much on it as far as labels go. But and then as you go down the page, any label where there could potentially be a loop of the events looking for something and it's not finding it, so it's jumping back to the same label. Let's say 2, plays through label 2, doesn't find what it's looking for, goes back to 2. Excuse me. Any label is going to have a weight 0, 0 right after it, and that creates that speed limit. Because obviously we don't want our jump 2 label skipping any of our speed limits. A good example would be, let's check out the Eagle Eerie. I think I got him. This boss. This is a good example. I'll pull him up. Parallel process. Is it this one? Yeah, this is it. Yeah, so this is the Eagle boss. This is a great example. It looks like, I'm sure there's a reason I have it set up this way. So you have that initial weight right there. And then he has a couple different variables because it's a boss. He's got an altitude variable and then a location of last routine. I think he's got like 6 different spots that he'll fly to. But obviously after that label, there's a weight, 0, 0. Let's find label 2. Label 2, another weight, 0, 0. So it's good practice, at least what I found in this game. It basically takes it from 2 or 3 events, parallel process events constantly going with no weights in them to create some serious lag that where you can't even play it, to a no discernible limit. Like I haven't found the limit of how many parallel process I can get, showing pictures over and over and over again, updating the screen. As long as I have those weights, it seems pretty solid. So that's that's kind of something I had to figure out, because it was either, the game's not going to happen because there's just too many processes going on for the engine to keep up, or you got to find a way around it. And it's that weight 0, 0. And I'm sure I was reading stuff on RMN. I think I saw something at some point that said like, yeah, make sure you put a weight in your events it'll help with lag. And that's probably where I kind of, figured it out and tried it out, and it seemed to work. So that's kind of my rule of thumb, is any event, just as out of good habit, whether it's parallel process or not, I start it with label 1 and then a weight 0 second weight. Okay, so as far as enemies, you get a lot of them. In the game. I mean, you have to have a bunch of them. I was going to talk a little bit about like pixel art, drawing, some of the sprites that I have to draw to have characters in the game. And I always had an issue. Man, I remember drawing on paint when I was a kid, and I remember being a kid thinking like I got pretty good at painting on MS Paint. Well, when I first started developing Onix Rift, I was using Rift graphics like most people do when they start off with RPG Maker, and eventually you get to a point where you're developing and you get a little better. You're looking at other people's games and kind of go, man, I think I want to find some like nicer graphics to really make this pop, really make it look good. And that's when I bought. So obviously I'm using Times Fantasy graphics, and he had some bundle. So basically there was a bundle available, and he specifically was like, I think it was right after 2K3 went official. So his bundle was buy these graphics for MV, and then you'll also get this 2K3, the same set in 2K3. And it was like a big bundle with multiple chipsets, multiple character sets. And I was like, okay, cool. Paid for them, downloaded them. And, some time went by, and I wanted to check out what other graphics he had available. And I can't find any for 2K3. So it looks like he primarily develops them for like the newer makers, like MV. And I've got some of his free ones for MV, or, maybe it wasn't MV, but it was one of the ones. Everything's basically double the size. And so I've got one set that I was just seeing if I could just go into MS Paint and resize it, and it works. It worked great. It resized down, and it looks good. But then I have to transport everything onto the correct chipset size for RPG Maker 2K3. Same with any characters that I want, and it just turns into like, man, I don't have the time, or I don't know. I just don't even want to do it. So I was sitting there one day. I made some ugly sprites, man, trying to figure out how to. You have that 24 width, 32 height for character sets in 2K3, and I got some, starting to try to do that without having any experience. Like, they look pretty awful, dude. They just like look like little blobs. I was trying to put way too much detail in them, getting frustrated. And I don't know. At some point, I was thinking about what I was doing as a kid. When I would draw things, and I was like, man, they look pretty good. Well, obviously I was drawing stuff a little bigger, but I remembered using a lot of the little circle tool. And, you think about it, because I would draw a lot on paper, and I'd think about it like, well, if I was drawing it on paper, what would I do? And I started using the circle tool again, and that was kind of the ellipsis. I don't know what the proper name is. And it kind of got me back into it. And I think the cobalt, the first enemy of the game, is the first thing I drew when I started. It kind of started clicking again. I started remembering like, oh, okay, this isn't impossible. So, that's how I started it. It's just like let's say the Frog King is what I kind of made last. And basically, looking at him, it's like he's a frog. He's got some bulbous cheeks, so there's one. We don't want his cheeks being a different size, so let's go ahead and make sure we get the same size circle. We know he has his chin, which is also kind of round and bulbous. This will be a quick. His mouth. Let's do that one, and let's clear some of this out. So we know that's going to hang over there. And then we clear this out. So this is kind of what I started doing when I started to get back into it. And let's do one more. I just started trying to redraw with the ellipses. And I got to where it was kind of coming back and clicking again. And once you do that, so that would be an advice that I would say is like, start with the ellipsis, dude. Think about what something's going to look like from a certain vantage point. Think about their cheeks. Think about where you want, kind of looks like a Ninja Turtle, but you know what I mean. I don't know. Give him a little nose, or a Yoshi, I guess. And then, I'll go through. So green, I'm pretty bad at palettes as far as, I don't know enough about them. So basically I'll draw a picture, and the color, that's something I'm bad about. I'll do the color. So for green, let's say I'll just start with this base green. I know I'll need a little bit darker one. So I'll go down here. I'll add it to my custom. I'll take this one. I'll bring it up somewhere in there, add it to my custom, and then I'll bring this up. And then, so 3 normally is what I'll go with of one color. And sometimes if I really want to make it a change, it never works out because obviously it always, when I save it as 256, I end up losing 2 of these colors, kind of. There's always something I lose. And then I'll go in and, so we have this bulbous cheeks, his chin, his nose, and then his head, his big old head. You know what? I don't like that. We don't want him to be. We'll do like that. Oops. There, he just got some big old fat cheeks. We don't want him to be like separate. And then, so your darkest one, you go through and it's like, okay, well, we know underneath his chin is going to be dark. So we'll go there. Now, I'm by no means a pixel artist, so don't take everything I have to heart. And that's, yeah, we'll start there. And then right here, maybe some low lights. Right there, I'm going to do one right here because I think that'll be good. And since this little line's coming up like the edge of his cheek, sometimes I'll let that darker green extend there. So this dark outline kind of continues into that green. And then we go to the next color up. And I know after the dark, it's not just going to go light. So we'll throw these in. And this is just a really quick, I just wanted to give an example of the process. And this isn't going to look identical to they're called amphibite, the frog guy I'm talking about. This isn't going to look identical to what I drew because I'm not looking at anything to draw this guy, but this just kind of shows the process. So we'll do that, maybe something like this right here. I basically always, the darker color, I kind of always want the next shade over to be right, touching any part that's that darker color right there. I always want the next color green up, touching that part. And then we got this next light, and that same rule goes for that one. And more I'm thinking about, so it's called, what I've heard it referred to as is pillow shading. The big rock guy, he throws the little gem enemies at you. If you look at him, dude, he's notoriously pillow shaded, dude. So that's when, like I have all these different planes, his nose, his chin, his two cheeks. They're all at different. They're supposed to be at different depths of the picture. And that one's notorious because I have the dark all the way around every circle on him, and then the next color up, or the next shade up, and then the next shade up, and then everything in the middle is the lightest color. That's pretty bad practice. It doesn't look great. I was kind of, I'm still learning, and I was kind of learning. I just recently kind of read some stuff about the whole pillow shading, and I knew it didn't look great. There's an issue with it. So I normally do. So basically what this is creating is a light source. You don't want a pillow shade because that makes it look like the light source is looking directly at the picture, perfectly in front of it. And that's not how we're looking at the world. I try to imagine the light source to the top left of the screen, and I'll kind of try to shade like that. And then obviously where there's any deep creases, you're going to have some shade in there. So avoid that. Avoid pillow shading. It doesn't look that great. And I actually have a challenge with anything bigger. It's easy. The smaller stuff's a lot easy. If you look at this bee, there's just not as much surface area, so it's a lot easier to not pillow shade. The bigger pictures are the ones that I have a real issue with pillow shading. So I think all around this cheek, we're gonna do the second shade, second lightest shade. So let's just do this. So avoid that. If you take one thing away here, avoid pillow shading. That's what I've learned. And I do need to go through and update some of my like that rock enemy, that big golem guy, because he just looks pretty bad. I like how he functions. He operates great. But he just doesn't look that great. And then we'll do this one. And because of what we talked about earlier, this is a big bulbous cheek. We kind of have some dark on the bottom because if the light source is coming from up here, you're going to have a little bit of shade on the bottom. So I'm actually, because we don't have too many colors to choose from, I'm going to extend this green, the darker green, up a little bit. And maybe it won't work out, maybe it will. Sometimes you just kind of got to wing it and see what happens. Okay, back to this. And then once you get a few different poses, it becomes a lot easier. I do a lot of copy and pasting. So once I have a few pictures to choose from, it gets a little easier, I'll say that. And see, I actually already don't like the amount of light green. Well, that's not bad that I'm seeing here. So that's the second color, and then we'll get this one. And we'll just do the whole chin, this dark color, because that shade, because it's below any of this. That one. And then let's do this. This is our second. Oh no, this is our second shade. Let's go one more here, just because I think it's going to look a little better. And then the shade. Let's do that. Oh, wait. Let's just fill in and see what it looks like. Yeah, so starting with something like that. We'll get a little bit more of this dark color down here. So we got some of that dark in there. Let's do the next color up. And we'll do this one, I think, all the way around. And that happens too, you know, I might change my mind in the middle and I think that golem guy, I think that kind of happened there. I was drawing him, and then I was getting to his face, trying to make something that looked like a rock, and somehow this kind of form where there was a pig nose, and I was like, actually, I think that looks pretty good. So I moved forward with it, and it did. I was really other than the pillow shading, I was really happy with the way that enemy turned out. So sometimes you get the Bob Ross moments, the happy accidents, and nothing wrong with that. Yeah, and then something like that. So give them a little highlight there. And yeah, that's good. Good enough anyways. And then you can just get creative with whatever eyes you want them to have, something angry. That's pretty good. Good enough for me, I guess, dude. And for the eyes, I normally throw a little gray in there because I just think plain white looks a little weird. Yeah, gives them a little bit more. I kind of like the white at the very bottom there. You can really accent how angry he is. Better turn our... Oh, it's on. I guess he looks like a Ninja Turtle, kind of, but you get the point, right? So that's kind of the process for my enemies. Yeah, that don't look very good, but let's get rid of this. And this is where I would probably start focusing on his eyes and do something different there. But that's what kind of started me. Yeah, and there's plenty about this thing that I don't like, so don't judge me on that. At least judge me on some of the end game stuff and not something you saw me draw on the spot. But that's kind of the process of how I draw the sprites. And then getting back to the a sprite that has to fit in a 24 by 32 box. I had a lot of trouble with that. So what I found, I talked earlier about the MV, how those graphics, if I scale them down to half size, they work and they look great for 2K3. Again, it's a little bit of a process, so I don't do it. So I haven't made my own chipsets, but I'm definitely drawing more and more props to put in each map so that it's a little, there's some differentiation between one map to another. So here's a good little trick. It's the same as that kind of concept. So if you've played the game, you've seen at some point you've gone past the little hydroelectric dam and you got these little goblin guys running around. Well, when I drew these originally, I was trying to draw them in this, the 24 by 32 box, and I promise you, I was not getting this. Like, this is not what I was drawing, and I had a hard time with it. So I think this is kind of when it first hit me. It's like, man, you know what? I'm going to use the whole ellipsis technique that I was just showing you. I'm going to draw them in a 48, or what is it, 24? Yeah, 48 by 64, which is this space right here. I'm going to draw him in that, and then I'm going to scale him down. He's not going to scale down perfect because there's just not enough room in this box. But it'll scale down to a point that's manageable. So let's resize him to 50. Okay, and you can see how, okay, well, now I got a shape I can work with. Like, so at this point, I just get my dark outline color, fill in where I think it needs to be filled in. We know his mouth goes right here. Yeah, it looks like I didn't do any line there. Draw that. And that's what I did to draw him. And so this has been a technique I've been using, not every time, but I did it with him. And there's nothing that's going to stop me in the future from doing this more when I have to cram some enemy that I have a vision of what I want him to look like into that 24 by 32. And it's easy enough because when I have his bit, at this size, you can be like, oh, this guy just did a bunch of circles and threw them together. Yeah, that's what I did. But when you shrink it down, it's a little harder to tell. That's kind of the process. So at this size, to get all these different animations, so all of his different frames. So you got here, he's sitting there sleeping. Here, he's running. So he's kind of jumping. You can see his run animation kind of. I think I have one of him chopping, like he has an axe and he chops down with his axe. That's what he hits. Oh, yeah, there's the axe right there. Right here. At the enlarged size, the 48 by 64, I drew all of his little body parts right here, color them the way you want them, and then just assemble them in the different. You might have to draw like the feet. You can see I drew this feet running. A lot easier to draw those at a larger scale, at twice the scale, than the tiny size, and to have them look good. And I just assemble his body in kind of the position I want. And if you're having a hard time even drawing the angle of the feet that you want, it is really helpful to have the rest of the body in the pose that you're looking for. And from there, you can really envision a little better maybe how you want the feet to be drawn. You know what I mean? So it just helps sometimes having that little extra visual so that you know. Yeah, so see, look at that. Well, how are we going to draw his feet? Okay, well, I'm going to take this, do that. And we know his feet are going to kind of come from there. Get the general idea of kind of the shape you want. Give him a little, we need some line to differentiate the bottom. So there, now we know. I would refine that a little bit if I wasn't on the spot. Complete that line so that we can just, and then, oh, we'll just make the top this color, let's say. So there, you know, and that's kind of how I go about that. Yeah, there you go. And, you know, having that body there is like, okay, that's a little easier to envision, and that's not awesome. This is better, but you get what I'm saying. That's kind of my process there. That's what I find easier anyways to help me draw some of these enemies. And then, you know, put it all together in game. Oh, it's going to be slow getting started. Got all that overhead that my crappy computer's trying to process here. Put that together in game, and you'll get these little guys, or you'll get them. I'll run over to them real quick and show you. You know, if you have a good-looking sprites, it'll make a good-looking game. That's a good little rule of thumb, I think, anyways. It's actually one of the things I realized earlier on in development was like, well, man, the better my sprites are, it's just, yeah, obviously it's nicer to look at, but I've read in the past, well, as long as your game has good mechanics, the graphics aren't a big deal. I don't know. I definitely agree that if you have really good mechanics and the game is intuitive for the player and easy to, you know, fun to play, the mechanics aren't frustrating, I definitely would agree that a game with horrible graphics would be better with really well functioning gameplay. But personally, I'm almost the opposite type of guy. Like, we had a NES when I was a kid. That's what I started on. It was a lot of fun. But even when I was young, it's like I recognized that it didn't look that great. And thinking back now, it's like, yeah, man, there's so many games on Super Nintendo that I would just, I would choose over any NES game just because it's like, man, I don't know, I have to work too hard with my imagination to play some of those NES games. They're pretty bad, graphics-wise. So I'm of the belief that's like, I don't think graphics are everything, but they definitely help. And then look, we have our little goblin sleeping there, and you get close enough to him. Oh, look at all those animations in play. He's going to swing his axe at me. Oh, there we go. Oh, we're going to use the skill. Kill him. I guess not. They're going to kill me. But there, and then there you can see the goblin in action. So right there's a good example. If you hear that, I don't know if you can hear it, but that mushroom was kind of half attacking, and you could hear the parallel process. The noise he was making was over and over and over again. That's because he's stuck in a label jump in a parallel process, but it wasn't actually lagging the game out because there's that speed limit set to it. That was just misplacement of a sound effect on my part, and I'm almost gotten used to it. I kind of like that it does it, so I haven't changed it. I don't know, it's weird, dude. One of those quirks of the game that I'm like, oh, shoot, man, that's kind of cool. I don't even care. He's going to get me. But that's kind of a rundown of how the enemy pages are set up to handle the different states that the enemy can be in. And then kind of my process for how I kind of got back into being able to draw my own sprite work. And then at least to a level of it's in the game, and obviously it clashes a little bit, but for what I'm doing, I'm not selling this thing. This is it meets my vision's purpose, so it works great for me. And so this goblin that we were looking at, we may as well have a look at his event script. So this is one that I've made a little farther. I got so far into making these enemies in the beginning, like the mushroom. He's got 4 pages, and I was handling everything. I was trying to save switches. I was like, well, I don't need switches because I have all these labels I can jump to, and I can just handle all of his different actions through in one parallel process. And obviously, I'm sure anyone that has half a brain is like, well, this is impossible to manage because you can't account for. I mean, you can, but it's hard to account for every single state. You would need a variable to track every state of this parallel process that he's in. That way, if it gets paused or something, it'll jump back to that label. Let's say you have 8 different labels, and every one of them says jump. At the beginning of the event, there'd be a conditional branch that handled 6 different label jumps based off of a variable's number. So if you paused while he was doing his wake up animation, and then you unpaused, that would be, that variable would be set to 1. And when you unpaused, his script would say, this was at 1, so I'm going to jump to him waking up. And I just didn't set it up like that. So anything after these first few enemies that were getting a little more complicated, I pretty quickly adopted, all right, I obviously already have so many variables that are allocated to however many enemies I have on screen. So enemy 1 has variables, let's say 1 and 2. Enemy 2 always has variables 3 and 4. Enemy 3 always has variables, you know what I mean, and so on. Well, I finally just was like, well, I don't know why I'm trying to save these, because it's not like I can't reuse the switches per every map for a million different enemies. So I ended up allocating like 10 reusable map switches, 10 reusable map variables, and those are what I'll use to handle my enemies. Yeah, so 261, enemy 1, conditional switch. Enemy 1, conditional switch 2. So actually I have 2 different conditional switches for enemy 1. And then that's how I started handling. So this guy, I wanted him to be sleeping. So when you walk on a map, that parallel process is the one you're going to see him sleeping, just this routine. And it checks, this is my event code to handle the radius. If enemy 1x is less than 50, that means the enemy or the hero is so close to him. And if that happens, that switch that we discussed in the last video about, the enemy 1 is in range turns on. And when that's in range, then this event, he goes through his little animation of his eyes blinking, and then enemy 1 conditional switch is on, and that brings him to this one where he starts running around. So from this is his parallel process, and this is actually a pretty simple one, but this one is however long that is. To him, being his first one, is just that. Pretty easy to manage, just that one page, because literally all it's doing is checking his position to the hero, and then running through one animation change. Well, just between 2 animations, this sleeping one and his eyes being open. And when that switch comes on, then page 3 handles him running towards the hero. And if the hero's so close, his attack switch comes on. So it looks like he's swinging his axe. And obviously we're stuck to 24 by 32. So you're seeing his axe is cut off there. Well, basically when this switch is on, this event right above him is his axe blade, and it knows where he's at, which direction he's facing. And if he's facing down and he throws his axe, this is set to change event location to below him. And this event is set to if it's on the hero or just right around that vicinity, he's going to hit you, and then it calls the damage animation. And then once that switch is off, that simply disappears and moves to a different spot. And you might say, well, why does it's an unseen event. Why would you even need to move it to a different spot? Well, it's not just the enemy's hurt animation that, like, the engine doesn't know what event that it's calling when I swing my sword and that hitbox activates where it's checking tiles around my hero. If you can't swing your sword in town, but anywhere, if I was next to a sign and the first page on that sign had something on it, like a message. If I swung my sword next to the sign, I could be 2 tiles away, but if I swing the sword and the sword animation, one of those tiles it hits, it's going to call that event and try to read it. So there's not one event here that the first page, if it's not an enemy, it's a blank page. So page 1 is actually never used because it'll try to call that event on page 1. If you have nothing on that page, which I never, anything that's not an enemy, I don't, you know, the game doesn't skip when it tries to read it. There's just nothing there. So it calls that event page, but nothing happens. So that was kind of interesting. I thought I'd share with you guys. There's not one, all of these right here, this little animation of this cobalt cooking, it's just the graphic. It's page 1, but there's nothing on it, but it would try to call that event if I went by it and swung it with my sword. I mean, it will call the event, but there's just nothing there, so it doesn't do anything. So I thought that was pretty, kind of an interesting little fact. Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to I thought it'd be fun to talk to you guys about how the combat works, and then a little bit about my sprite work with how I get going on developing an enemy. And normally I'll have something in mind. I got enemies in it that I'm not really proud of, and at some point I'm going to go back and change. There's if you played it since the last upload months ago, my final upload I did, there's enough there where after you beat the eagle, you fall off the mountain and you end up breaking through the ground, and you end up in Fleema's cage. It's like the first little, it's like a fairy thing. He gives you the magic, your first magic that you get to use, fire. Obviously, Fleema. But if you go into their Magic Cavern, I'm sure you'll notice if you play, you're an hour into the game, and I'm already using palette swaps of my enemies. This was, I mentioned it in the last video, a quick decision, just based off of I wanted to get something up and playable. So I did a palette swap, and then just beefed this guy's stats up and gave him a magic spell that he would use. You know, it's the fire cave, so I thought it fitting that he gets to use the first fire spell. And then I made these little mushroom guys that literally their only purpose, I don't even think you get experience for killing them. Their only purpose, yeah, no experience, is to block the player and make it frustrating for it. Like, maybe it'll make it harder for him to get to the other bad guys, but they're one hit kills, so they're just kind of annoying. I might get rid of them, but I'm definitely in the process of redoing the enemy lineup. Here's one that I don't like, but I was starting it. This is one I was starting to event. He's just this little guy that pops out of the ground. I was gonna make him ignore that. I was gonna make him unkillable unless you're using the stone gloves, because it was always planned, I just didn't get to it. I added a feature with the stone gloves where if you're wearing them, you can not only pick up, move or pick up heavy items like big stone monoliths. Your guy actually hits the ground when he's wearing them. I think I had it on when I did that little play. Oops, that little test play. I'll just show it real quick. Anyway, in case you guys didn't catch it. So before, if you had the stone gloves equipped, it just wouldn't do anything when you hit they're equipped up in that left corner. You can see the stone gloves. Let's get out of this map so we can check it out. You would put them on, and other than being able to move heavy blocks, you would just think nothing was equipped unless you looked at that picture. And now, if you're wearing them, obviously, they actually do, I think, double damage. Like, they're pretty, if you go up to an enemy and hit them, they do quite a bit of damage. I can't remember the stats I gave them, but the drawback is it's literally one tile in front of you, and that's it. So if someone gets good at jumping in there, hitting them and running away, they can do damage. And in the future, maybe I'll have a boss that's featured that, maybe you have to hit him with the gloves to get his defense down, and then you can switch to your sword if you want to go in and really start beating him up. But that's a feature I added because I had planned on something, and again, back to the refining things, I haven't really been adding content, but I've been doing stuff like that. So that's a little feature. I drew that. That's actually the hoe animation. If you just look at his stance and how he hits, that's the same movement he does for the hoe, only I put stone gloves on him to hit the ground, kind of shake the screen. So that's kind of a fun little addition to play with. If you download it, that'll be a difference that you see. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the enemies and the sprite work and kind of how the hit detection works. I thought you guys, maybe it works a little different than you thought, or maybe you guys are pretty well versed in it and you already figured like, oh yeah, we figured he did like a call event. And I definitely probably could have done it a different way. I will say this: I've played a few any action RPG I come across on RMN. That's what I like to play, dude. So I always download them and try them out. And there's a lot that are really good. Like they're good looking games. They're nice. They function. I've noticed a common theme. I've even seen it on some people's game pages where they'll say like, yeah, guys, if you swing and for whatever reason your hit detection stops working, you know, they pause the game and unpause it and it'll start working again. Or, you know, just swing your sword a couple times, it'll start working again. That's one thing I'll say I'm pretty happy with mine is that issue has never popped up. Like it's checking tile by tile, and if there's an event there, it's going to call it. The only time there's not going to be, it calls the lowest or the highest event ID. So if two events are standing on top of each other and you hit it, let's say one event is a treasure chest and somehow an enemy got on it and that treasure chest event ID is higher than the enemy's, it'll call the treasure chest rather than the enemy, and the enemy will be unaffected. So if you notice you swing your sword and it doesn't hit the enemy, you know, there's probably an event on it. Now, I don't just disregard it. I actively on my maps when I'm eventing, I make sure I'll have like when I'm mapping, I'll have maybe 20 different events and I'll pick through the smallest event IDs if I'm doing like these sparkles on the wall or something. If they were going to be in a spot where the enemy could walk, I'll make sure they're lower than any enemy ID on the screen as to avoid that. But there are a few maps. I think the Crystal Caverns has one. The first little caves you go into, there's that treasure chest in the middle of the room after you clear the room. Those little spikes go down, and if the little gem top enemies go on those little, where the spikes went down, you can see little holes in the ground. If they walk on those and you swing your sword, you'll notice that you won't hurt them. I just haven't got around to changing those event IDs. It'd be an easy one to fix, just haven't bothered doing it. But if you ever are playing it and you're trying to hit an enemy and he isn't taking damage, it will be corrected. It's an easy correction, but he's probably standing on an event with an ID greater than his. So that's the one fixable thing that will be fixed but isn't. Other than that, it's never a issue with the hit detection. It's an issue with an event ID number that I wasn't careful enough to make sure it was lower than the enemy's event ID. So that aspect, I'm happy with mine. The hit detection's rock solid. Like, it's going to call the event if the event's there. But yeah, so I just wanted to make another video for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I might try to make another one sooner or later. I don't know how much anybody actually wants to hear about Onix Rift. That's why I kind of got into more of the development side of it this time. And there's not much of the game. It's like an hour of gameplay, so I need to develop some actual content to moving forward, or actually event it in, map it and event it in, so I can have something more to show you guys. But I don't know if you guys have any questions or wondering how I did something. Put a message under the video or something, or you can PM me, or I don't know, whatever you want, man. I'm into it. I like checking RMN, so catch you guys later.